Now that we're confident with Docker and Docker Compose, we're going to see how we can make better usage of Docker images, namely by creating images that can be customized at runtime. The concept being that you would build the image once, and then you can change its behavior when you spin up the container at runtime. A good example of this at work can be seen in the Nginx official Docker image. If you look at the reference on the Docker Hub, you can see that the container supports using environment variables in the Nginx configuration. So that means that in Docker Compose or in your Docker container, you are going to set environment variables, and you are going to make reference to these variables in your Nginx configuration. You are going to make sure that you put that configuration into a template, and at runtime, the Nginx container will replace the values of the environment variables by, replace the environment variables by their values, and your Nginx configuration will be automatically adjusted. So you can see how this works if you look at the Docker file for the actual Nginx container. So you can see that the Docker file is built based on a Debian container. There is a bunch of things that are happening, installing packages and whatnot. And then you have the entry point, which is the /docker entry point file. So you can actually have a look at that file. This is a script. And this script basically runs through a bunch of scripts, which are all located in the /docker-entrypoint.d directory. And for each of these files, it's going to run that script, and then it's going to run Nginx. And these files, you can see them here. You can have a look at this one, for instance. This one makes sure that the Nginx is listening on IPv6. The one that we're interested in at the moment is this one, env-subst. And what this does is that it takes all the template files in the template directory. You can see it here, /etc/nginx/templates. And for all the files with a .template suffix, it will run the env-subst command. And that command is basically taking a file and replacing all the environment variables by their value. And then it outputs that into the actual configuration file. And then the entry point script resumes and Nginx is being started. We can have a look at how this is working. We are going to create a Docker Compose file, version 3, and we're going to set one service, which I'm going to call web. And this service is going to use the pre-made Nginx image. And that's actually all we need to get started. I'm going to bring everything up. My image is already on my computer, and my container is running. So if you have a look at what's going on inside, so this is the Nginx configuration, and basically in the conf.d folder, you have the default.conf, and this default.conf is actually the basic Nginx configuration. So what we are going to do here is to make sure that we set up a custom Nginx configuration file based on the template, and that we use environment variables in this configuration file so that we can change its behavior at runtime. So what I'm going to do here first is copy the Nginx configuration file onto my local folder. So my container is called week12.1, and my configuration file is located there. So now I have it here locally. And well, I'm just going to remove all the comments to make it easier to read. That's our basic configuration file. So here we have the root folder, which is statically defined as /usr/share/nginx/html. So what we're going to do here is make it use an environment variable, and I decided that this variable will be called web folder. I'm going to save that file, and now this file should be called .template as a suffix. And now I'm going to write a Docker file, and this Docker file, let's make a folder for that. And this Docker file will take from Nginx, and we are going to copy default.conf.template into /etc/nginx/templates, and that should be it. And now make sure that the file is available in the correct folder, and change our Docker Compose to make sure that we're going to build this image. Let's make sure that I'm doing it again. Oh yeah, that was just the first time it was built. All right, and now if I Docker Compose exec web dash, here I have my default.conf folder. It looks like it didn't work. So what happened? Okay, so I was just inspecting my Docker container, and I made very bad mistake. My templates here is actually a file, and this is my actual template. So that's not really good. Obviously, I would wanted to create a folder and to have my file inside that folder. So we are going to make that happen. We are going to run mkdir/etc/nginx/template. Make sure we build the image. And now, oops, what's going on? Oh, well, yeah, let's look at the logs. This is actually kind of expected. We have changed our configuration file, and we have instructed it to use the web folder variable, but this variable is not defined because we haven't defined it anywhere yet. So if we want that to work, we need to define that variable. Can make that with environment. Let's say web folder. So here I'm just going to use the default value, user share nginx HTML. But obviously you may want to change it to something different depending on your needs. Okay. Now my container is running. If I look at the logs, you can see that my configuration file was created from the template. Now I can look at the container, and my Nginx config is now based on the template, and because this is set by the end variable, I can pretty much change the value in my Docker Compose and just restart the environment, and the configuration is going to be adjusted in my Nginx config. So Docker Compose is going to see that we made a change to the end variable, and here I'm just going to look at the configuration file. It should have an updated value for the web folder. So the web folder might not be what we are mostly interested in, but here it could be interesting to make our Nginx configuration dependent on an end variable, which defines the backend URL that you want to forward your API requests to. So I'm going to change that end variable to something else. Let's say API URL. And here, I'm going to make sure that my Nginx is going to forward my request to API:8000 by using this API URL variable. So that requires that I change my template. So here, let's put it back to the default value. And here in my template, I'm going to add my API location, which is /JSON. And I'm going to add a proxy pass to the API URL. And now I would need to rebuild because I changed the template. My container should be, oh, doesn't work. Oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. Our configuration file has been adjusted, but the problem is that the host name that we used, API, is not defined and doesn't have any service waiting for connections on it. So Nginx actually fails because it says that the host is not found. So this is not related to our configuration file. It's related to the fact that our configuration file makes a reference to a host which is not defined in our Docker network. In the grand scheme of things, you would have all your containers set up in your Docker Compose, including the application container. So you would basically have to make that work without having to worry about the fact that you have this warning. We can fix that, do something that doesn't have a lot of sense, but we can forward all our requests to Google, for instance. That should actually work. Yeah. My container is running, and now I can exec and have a look at my configuration file. You can see here that for all the requests coming to /JSON, we are going to proxy pass to Google. So obviously that's not going to work, but it's just to show you an example of how you can use such a container to route requests to different backend services. And you would just have to change this end variable to adjust the behavior of the container. Now here in our case, what we are going to do is build an application image for our Python application that is customizable at runtime, so that when we change environment variables of our choice, the application is going to connect to the database of our choice, and not only the database that was set up in our Docker Compose. So that can be useful if you change your connection settings, for example. So here I will create a folder for my app, and I'm going to write a Docker file for it. I'm going to use Python 3. And here, well, I can reuse a file from last week. Let me just grab that. Okay, so I have a very basic, simple Docker file here for my Python application, where I add a user and then run everything as that user, download my files, install the requirements, and then well, make sure that everything is working as expected. And now, obviously, if I look at my infrastructure, my container is not working because, well, actually I have an error in my when running my app. No module named web. Okay, let's look into that. Yeah, I did that from memory, but looking at the GitHub repository, you can see that the thing we actually want to use is WSGI, not web. That's probably the problem here. Let's see. Now I should get an error, but because of the database connection. All right, so now I cannot connect to my MySQL server. Sorry, here cannot connect to my MySQL server because it's trying to connect to localhost, and that's not going to work. So once again, here the situation comes from this file, the backend.conf, which has some static values already set up. So here we have a couple of options in order to make that happen. Basically, what we want here is that this file changes when there is a, well, depending on the environment variables that are defined. So what we could do is use sed and use the existing configuration file and make sure that we match, for instance, this value and replace it with another value. Or we can simply copy / download that file, have it locally, and make sure that it uses environment variables and use env subst like Nginx does. So I'm going to start with just examples with sed because this is also useful to know. Okay, here. So here I can create my own backend.conf. I'm going to put all the contents in there. And here, for instance, my SQL host, I'm going to use a trick. I'm going to use a pattern that's very easy to recognize and that is very unlikely to happen in other situations. And this is going to be my pattern that I'm going to replace with sed. Now in my Docker file, I'm going to copy my backend.conf. And here, copy backend.conf. And that needs to go, well, it needs to go in the main application folder. Forget the dot because we want to copy the backend.conf into the current folder, which is going to be /app/src. So that works. So let's see what that does. Oops. Now, if we exec app bash, we have limited time, but we can see that our file here has been copied and that this is the host that our container is trying to connect to. So very soon it's going to fail because that host does not exist and you cannot connect to that host. So that's going to be an error very soon. So what we are going to do now is that we're going to make sure that at the build stage of our image, we implement everything that is necessary so that at runtime, this value is replaced by something else. and we're going to use sed for that. So here the trick is to transform your CMD or your entry point into a script and to run all the commands you want into the script, and at the very end to run the command that actually runs your service. So let's see how we can make that happen. So we have the Docker file here, and I'm going to copy a file which I'm going to call start.sh. And I'm going to copy that in the main folder as well. And now instead of running the app, we are going to run the shell script. /bin/bash start.sh. So obviously we need to write this shell script. So this is where your shell scripting knowledge comes in handy. So this is called start.sh. Write down the shebang, and it's probably a good idea to at least set -e and x to have some trace when we run the script. And well, basically here I'm just going to make a script that runs the service, which was gunicorn. So here I'm going to use exec. So this is an advanced topic for Docker, but basically your script is going to execute and run other processes. So the very last process that you are going to run should be run with exec, so that it actually replaces the bash wrapper script that runs your service. So now I'm going to run gunicorn and app. Let's rebuild the containers. Okay. You can see here that the command is bin bash start.sh. So it's not the previous gunicorn command. You can also see that in the Docker PS. And well, since our script doesn't contain anything else, it's not very useful. So I'm just going to do echo. Sorry, post the screen sharing, my bad. So here I just rebuilt the container again, and then I well, started it. And now if I look at the logs for the app, you can see that this is run before the service is launched in the Docker container. So my echo command in my script was run before my gunicorn process is actually started. Okay, so now if you put everything together, you can make some changes with sed in your configuration file. So for instance, here what I did is that I added this sed command, which is going to replace this weird MySQL host pattern with the actual value of the MySQL host variable in my shell in the /app/src/backend.com. So obviously now we just need to define this into the Docker Compose file, which is in the current folder. Here we can do environment. MySQL host. And let's just use 127.0.0.1 just to show that it actually works. So I'm going to go here. We're going to restart our things. Now our container here is not working. Cannot connect to MySQL server on 127.0.0.1. Now, if we want to connect to a different database service, let's say google.com, we just have to change the end variable. We don't have to rebuild the container because the value is going to be adjusted at runtime. And we can have a look at the logs. Well, it's not rejected yet. No, it's not web, it's app. And you see here that your MySQL host was changed to google.com. So that's an example. We said it's actually a little bit clunky. It does work, but it's a good idea to use env subst for these kind of use cases. So what we are going to do now is adjust your Nginx configuration and your script so that instead of doing sed, so sed still has a lot of good usage and it's good to know, but env subst works really well. So the way env subst work is that you will feed it a file and it's going to output another file. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to feed it a backend.conf.template. I'm going to write the output into backend.conf. So that requires me to change my Docker file because now my template should be copied into the backend.conf.template. Not backend.conf. Or maybe I can change the name locally. Copy it to the current format. Right. So I need to change the name of my backend.conf file as well. Now rebuild the whole thing. I don't really remember which value we used for the SQL host. Oh, yeah, well, we're trying to use env subst, but that command is not available in our container. So in order to make it available, we are going to install it. Because we're using the Python 3 default container, we can use apt-get to install new software. So that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to do that at the very top because we want to be root to be able to install software. Oops. So I'm going to run apt-get -q install. I'm just going to try env subst. I'm not sure that's the name of the package, but hoping. And rebuild our environment. Okay, so it's not env subst. So our Python 3, well, let's debug this. Our Python 3 is based on Debian, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's based on Bullseye Debian. So now we can do Bullseye package and subst. And it looks like it's in the get text dash base. So let's try that. So that's the name of the package that this is coming from. Now in my Docker file, I would need to install get text base. Okay, maybe I need to update my apt-get first. Okay. So now we have env subst. Fortunately, we made that change at the top of our Docker file, so that's going to invalidate all the cached layers below. So it needs to reinstall the Python dependencies. And now my container is running. I forgot to change my configuration file to actually use an env variable. So it still has this clunky entry here. Fix that. SQL host. So I have to rebuild. Look at the logs. Still up. I just wanted to look at the configuration. And now you can see that the same kind of result has been achieved by using env subst. So the good thing about env subst is that if you have several env variables, you don't have to do several set calls for each of them. It will replace all of them at once. Okay, so that was very useful for customized containers. The other thing that we're going to look at is the management of service dependencies, which is something you may have experienced last week. When the application starts, sometimes the database is not yet ready, so it fails to connect to it. So what we're going to do here is use that opportunity of having a script to start our application to actually make that script wait for the database to be up and running before we go further and run our service. So one of the options here is wait for it, which is a shell script. So I can change my screen here. Well, that's available on GitHub. And that is the script. So what you can do is just reuse that script straight from GitHub. And the way you can use it is with running wait for it, the host name and the port that you want to connect, followed eventually by the command that you want to run when the connection completes and succeeds. So here I'm going to grab the file from GitHub. So that's the URL that I can use to download in my container. And now I'm going to change back to my Docker file. And I'm going to wget -qq, the wait for it script, and let's say, yeah, let's put it into the current folder /app/src. So the good thing about downloading it from GitHub is that you will always get the latest version, so that can have some side effects sometimes, security implications. But let's say that this is going to be good enough for us, and we are going to make sure that this script can be executed as well. So chmod a for all users plus x, wait for it.sh. And now in our startup script, we are going to call that wait for it script. And that script is going to wait for your my SQL host MySQL port. So what's going to happen is that when you run the script, first you're going to change the variables in the configuration file, but then you are going to call that script, and the script is going to wait until that host and that port are available for connections. So if your database is not yet ready, assuming that your database is defined in MySQL host and its port defined in MySQL port, then this is going to block the execution of your container until the database is available. And then when we run the service, we know that the database is available because we waited for it. So obviously now I would need to have a MySQL port variable as well, 306. And here I'm going to use 127.0.0.1 to make the test quicker. To build the thing. Okay. Now it's up. This is a little bit surprising. Actually, it's not, because it's wait for it. Okay, so now you can see that our script is running, and now wait for it is waiting 15 seconds for this TCP connection to become available. Right. And after we waited long enough, because we are not running a MySQL server on that host, then it times out and our container exits. So we know that if the database is not available, at least the container is not going to start. So we could create a new database container using the MariaDB image. London, I think it's called MySQL London root password. MySQL user video. MySQL password super secret. MySQL, is it MySQL database? MySQL database user password database hello. Okay, and open up again. I'm going to create a database for me. And what is going on with the app? Oh, well, I forgot to change this value. Now we want to connect to this Docker database that we have defined in our Docker file. So now your MySQL host is actually database. Okay. Okay, so this is kind of expected here, obviously, because I didn't change all my environment variable substitutions in my backend.conf, but my application is trying to connect to my database container. It's just that it's using the wrong credentials, so we'll need to fix that in order for my app to work. Now, after making all these changes, my environment is now working. You can see here that wait for it is trying to wait for the database to be available. It is available, and then my GUnicorn starts. And because I made sure that my credentials were good, then it can connect to the database. So now in my Docker Compose, I have to make sure that this MySQL user matches with that one, because my app is going to connect to my database. So this is something that we can do as well. Instead of using environment and to define the variables sometimes in different areas, what we can do is define an environment file that contains all the environment variables that you want to use in your containers. So I'm just going to create a file called vars.env. You can call it pretty much however you want. Adjust the syntax so that it's actually valid as a bash environment file. Basically, it's defining a couple of variables in bash. I can save this. And here I can use and file. That should work. Let's see. Everything is up and running. My database was available. See, it took 2 seconds here to start the database. Maybe we did not pay attention, and we actually should have added depends on, because the wait for it is going to wait for the service. But if you can also make the dependency at the Docker level, that's even better. So now we can make sure that our app starts after the database has started. Database.db. Okay, maybe here it goes a little bit quicker. And now we have database available after 0 seconds. So here you have it. Env subs, very useful to deal with environment variables in templates. We have to create our own wrapper script in order to create and run commands before the container finishes booting. You want to run your main service using the exec keyword to make sure that you don't keep a wrapper script running that just runs another program, and that there is still this huge difference between the build stage, which is whatever is going to happen in the Docker file, and the runtime stage, which is what is going to happen in your entry point /cmd instructions of your Docker file.